Hi, welcome to GC Casual Friday from In the House. We meet each Friday at noon Eastern Time, and we often have guest speakers who present topics of interest to our community. In the House is a community for general counsel and other in-house lawyers to meet, exchange best practices, get to know each other better, and to generally support career growth for the in-house counsel community. I'm usually at my desk, but I'm at a beach house for Memorial Day weekend, so I apologize for the informality. But as co-host David Slater pointed out, it's appropriate for a program called GC Casual Friday. So thank you very much. And I'm really excited to have Dan Ruderman from LexisNexis, in particular the CounselLink subsidiary of Lexis, to discuss the importance of metrics in corporate legal departments. So Dan, would you mind introducing yourself a little bit and just sharing a little bit about your background before you begin your presentation?
Yes, that'd be great. Thanks. Can everybody hear? Well, I'm assuming everybody can hear me okay. My name is Dan Ruderman. I'm up in the Berkshires of Massachusetts, so I'm up just a little bit of a trip up the Taconic Parkway if you're in the New York City area. And I've been in the technology industry for about 30 years and at LexisNexis for 21 plus years. Always focused on helping solutions for the law department and for claims legal departments as well. So I'm very grateful to be invited to present to your group today, Chris, so thank you.
Our pleasure. Thanks for coming.
And then, and Haley is going to be presenting today too.
Correct.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. My name is Haley Day. I am an account executive with CounselLink. I've been in technology consulting with Lexis for about 7 years now. I worked with the law firms before I came over to work in the corporate legal space. I'm joining you guys from the lovely town of Raleigh, North Carolina, but my territory with Lexis is the Northeast. So I spend most of my time traveling to New York, New Jersey, Boston, sometimes Philly. So I'm excited to be on with you guys today.
Fantastic. I also want to mention that David Slater is co-host of GC Casual Friday. So thank you, David, for all the great work here. And we also have our COO for In the House, Nita Sanger, who brings decades of operational experience. And she recently joined our executive team here at In the House. So it's wonderful to have both of them as well. So Haley and Dan, why don't you go ahead and get started with the presentation? Would you like people to hold their questions or go ahead and ask out loud or in the chat window if they have questions?
Haley and I have different styles. So I will say that during my session, go ahead and ask questions. I won't be looking at the chat. So if a good question comes up and you want to interrupt me, Chris, you can. If I'm going to get to it later, I'll just say that's a great question, and we'll get to it in a little bit.
Okay.
Okay.
So, I will keep an eye on the chat window throughout the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And now I'm going to hit the share button, so you should be seeing that puzzle picture.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Terrific. So that's just the puzzle picture that starts. I learned something about making presentations, which is if you download it from Wikimedia, it can add 37 megabytes. So I had to screen snap it instead. The three things, so the topic is metrics, key metrics for an agile legal department. And I've been interested in metrics and analytics for a long time. I'm a little bit of a nerd, and I have a little bit of a passion for it. And Chris and Nita very kindly spent some time with me and said, too much. Focus. So the three areas of focus that I'm going to talk about are just how to pick a metric or two in the categories of work management, in the categories of financial controls, and in the category of vendor relationships. It really tells you that there's a fourth category, which is kind of information management. I'll say that once. I probably won't say it again, but you'll see how throughout the theme is that picking your metrics and then conveying that information is really what's going to make things better in the department. So the first topic, work management. So matters assigned to law firms are a pretty important metric for spending. They describe that a lot of in-house attorneys are really managers, right? It helps you understand workload, helps you manage the vendors, but it's really just one part of the work performed by your department. And really what happens is that inside is that requests come in all day. They come in from the telephone, they come in from email, texts. If you've got Teams or Slack or other apps, then requests come into the lawyers all day long. There's service of processes come in. So you've got all these inputs coming into your internal attorneys all day long. And it's not easy to know what they're doing. And at some point, somebody's going to ask, but you can always get ahead of it by knowing this information and being ready to present it to the key stakeholders. So this little pie chart thing on the left, this donut, is actually a chart that you can do that if you use any of the apps that are out there that help you manage matter intake or legal requests, this gives you a picture of what are all the things that are being done by your attorneys, whether they've ever been called a matter or assigned to outside counsel or not. Some companies are so interested in tracking this that they resort to asking their attorneys to track their time again. But every attorney that we talk to that's chosen to work in-house cites that one of the benefits of going inside is not tracking time anymore. So there's ways to look at it and get you what you want. And the reason to track this is that it's something that you can show to your stakeholders so that they understand what you're doing. And it's also a way that you can get what you want, whether what you want is more staff or to do a panel convergence or a panel expansion project. Let me tell you a little bit more about what I mean there. So that know what your people are doing, understand the workload and the trends, and convey the relative value. So what is relative value? This is a really, what counseling, Charlie, I can't see the whole
So
chat.
here, Charlie just wanted to know what Counsel Link is. So what?
Got it.
And
That's,
it's
yep.
a good idea to explain that because it's
Okay.
part of Lexis, but it started out as a separate company, if my understanding is correctly. So
Yep.
is correct.
Yeah. So, and we're trying not to. So my presentation today, I hope, is going to be informational and helpful, and not just. I'm not going to just show you things that you can only do in CounselLink or pitch my product. CounselLink is a integrated enterprise legal management system that covers ways for you to manage vendors, ways for you to manage finances, ways for you to manage the work that's being performed in the department. It's a SaaS-based solution. I'm the director of strategic partners. Haley's an account executive, so she could spend more time with you on that and give you demonstrations if you want, but we weren't going to focus too much on it. But we did put the logo on every slide, so I hope you'll forgive me for that. And what I wanted to show you here is this is a slide. This is a slide that says you don't have to make your internal lawyers track time to be able to understand what they're doing and how much of it they're doing and what the value is. So this graph, I think of this as a remarkable graph. This shows you all the people in the department, their workload, and something called the relative value of the work they're doing. And in this case, relative value is a metric agreed upon by the general counsel and the director of legal ops of a life insurance company. It's a real graph from one of our clients, and it expresses the importance to the company of this work being done. The bottom axis, that x-axis, is relative value. It's a marker that goes from 1 to 3, and the y-axis on the left is the number of matters. And the curved line is the trend line that shows that lawyers working higher value matters have lighter caseloads. That is kind of what you would expect, right? Here's a question though. What kinds of conversations could you have if you had this graph about the work being done in your department? Chris, I don't know the best way to go about asking a question. People could just unmute and ask if they want.
You can unmute and ask. You can type into the chat window. There is a polling feature, but we don't have that enabled today, so we won't be using that. I did want to mention, though, I don't know if you mentioned this or not yet, Dan, but each dot represents a person and a lawyer in the legal department. So yeah, everyone has kind of their own color in this chart. So I just want to make sure that I made note of that. So as you're trying to figure out the chart, that's each dot could be you or someone else in the legal department if you're at this insurance company.
So you can see that this, and it's a life insurance company, you can see this gray dot over here is somebody that's got maybe 85 matters of a relatively low value in in the metric that they're using to do this, right? Whereas this dot up here, it just also happens to be right on the trend line, is got significantly higher value, relative value matters, and a much lower caseload, closer to 40. So I kind of cheated. I put a big red arrow by this orange like dot here at the left side. You're now looking at an attorney who's working on the lowest rated value matters and has a tremendously high caseload. And this could be so important for a number of reasons. This, as the manager of the department, you know who the person is, right? If it was your graph, you'd look at it, you'd click on it, it would have the name of them. And it could help inform you as to whether or not this person's burning out or thrilled, right? This could be somebody that chose this career path and they just love turning over contract documents, and you may never get an employee that can turn over 250 of these things on a regular basis again. Or it could be somebody who is really close to burnout and it's a chance to ask for another employee to lighten the load. Without knowing anything more about it, I can't give you that answer, but the department that runs this uses this to manage their resources, their budget, and to manage their people.
So I guess if you're a real superstar, you'd be up in the upper right-hand quadrant of that graph, right? Possibly.
Yeah, I would be terrified though if I had an employee that had all the bet the company cases and was dealing with 120 of them or 240.
You better get him some help, right?
Yeah, I'd be like upping my reinsurance contract or decreasing my self-insured retention. I'm going to go on to the next sort of topic here, which is finance. So that's a little bit about what we mean by picking a key metric in work management and tracking them. Now, it should be obvious that financial metrics should be tracked, right?
There is a question in the chat window. Sorry to talk over you, but I think this has to do with the last graph. So Victor asks, are you assuming that on average every case is the same amount of work?
No, they're not. So it's a great point, Victor. So that's, in a way, Victor, what you're speaking to by asking that question, it tells me that you're thinking about it and realizing that there's always another variable, right? There's always some other variable. And it's true. And that's why you only want to pick a few that you focus on, depending on the size of your department and your overall matter workload is going to tell you how many you need to work on and how you're going to manage. So I would think that, a higher value matter may in fact be more work. It may also be entirely managed outside, and that this is an attorney managing and that you've got best counsel you could have on it. There's a lot of factors that would go into how much work, how much of the day is spent on it, how many hours a day, how many tasks and activities are performed. So you're not getting all of that. You're just really getting what's my workload in relationship to value by attorney. It's one piece to look at. But what I like about it, obviously I like it, is that it gives you a snapshot that you can use for a number of reasons. Like I said, even if you only use this to say, I need to hire another attorney to handle the cases that Mrs. Orange is working on. But I think there's a lot richer data for that.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Dan.
Okay.
Oh, and David Slater has a comment. Sorry, I don't want to slow you down too much, but David Slater had a good comment, which is you probably want your attorneys around the trend line, because if you have outliers, they may be either spending too much time on a matter or too little time on a matter. So I think that's an excellent point.
Yeah, and that's what trend lines are for, right? You want to know, in general, am I hitting the trends? Am I doing it right? And you said it exactly right. Anything, I do have an overriding principle. Anything that leads to a conversation is a good thing, right? Because it's people we're talking about. At the end of the day, we're talking about people. We're talking about the law. The law is about people. So my question before is, what should you track in financial metrics? The answer really is everything. Track everything about money. This is what the other people in the business want to hear and see from you. This is how you demonstrate that you're controlling and managing things. These are big bucket variables I put on the left. And the important thing to do is to be able to track them by things like business unit, practice area, attorney, and law firm. you really need to know what you spend, with whom you spend it, and for whom you spend it, meaning like what department. I had a CEO that I met with once, and it was quite a while ago, and his statement was, my general counsel runs the only department that doesn't have a budget, and he exceeds it every year. Right? Now those times have changed, right? We can't do that anymore, and so showing that you've got control over things is important. How many people, I don't have a poll set up, but the question I'm going to ask you is about budgeting, my next question. And it's like, if you've got a budget, you probably have a budget for your department, but do you budget by matters? Do you budget by practice areas? Do you budget by business units? And I think, if I'm asking that, I'm suggesting it, right? And here's the reasons to suggest budgeting, so that when you start budgeting matter-based budgets, even if they're simple budgets that you're only using to get some report like this, you get access to risk information. So this is what we call a lipstick chart. It's just gathered from the data on the budgets and the spend against the budgets. You want to set up a way to look at it by various factors. But in this case, this report, what I like about this one is it gives instant, visceral, visual information about matters that are going over budget. And you can talk a little bit about it, and you can see that at the top is regulatory trade issues, exceptionally over budget. Commercial are not yet over budget, but that green is pretty full. Your employment cases are not. Patents, I'm not going to read through the bottoms. If this were a report that one of you ran today about current year spending, it would have a lot of really valuable information for you. It would let you know that your regulatory trade issues are well beyond what you were expected, and you need to start to notify the business that you're going to have to increase budgets substantially. But it'll also tell you the same thing about litigation at the bottom. And literally today, I mean, if this is what your litigation picture is like right now, you're probably in a lot of trouble, because if the court's being closed, you're not going to be spending anything now. And if they open this year, you're going to be spending a ton when those courts reopen and the backlog starts to push through. So there's things to look out for. And the same with employment cases, right? That you may have some employment cases that are going to arise as a result of the current world conditions that we're dealing with.
Dan, two quick things I wanted to add from our prep session, but I think I remember, but tell me if I'm misremembering. So I think one thing you told me was that this is actually live customer data. It's anonymous, but you took data from an actual customer of yours, which I think is interesting. The other thing you told me about these lipstick charts is the business side and the C-suite actually love these things, right? It tells them at an instant what's going on. And even though lawyers may not always be accustomed to these types of charts, this is the kind of thing that other business people look at all the time. I think is, I'm paraphrasing what you said, but I think that other people in the company would be very interested in this type of information.
Yeah, I think thank you, Chris, for reminding me of that. It is well said. I can't see people's hands or anything, but if you've been in a board meeting, what the experience typically is that every department puts up graphs except for the law department. So a way to become kind of a part of the team and a leader of the team and another executive, an executive that happens to run the law department, but a leader and an executive, is to put up a couple of graphs. And what business unit leaders like is when you're informing them of emerging risk and issues in their business, and you're keeping them up to date on the things that they are aware of, but they've sort of turned over to you. You show them that you're dealing with it. It's a great way to continue to own the respect and to have the rest of the company see your value.
Great. And just a quick note on time, Dan. We're halfway through, so I know I'm slowing things down by asking questions also, but I want to make sure that we
are, Chris. I don't know what I'm going to do with you. It's totally fine. So this is something I'm going to talk about here called, so how fast do you pay your firms? Now, every client that I talk to tells me that they pay their firms very quickly. And every law firm that I talk to tells me that their clients don't pay them very quickly at all, that they think that they might be at the bottom of the list. Somebody just recently as this morning said that they think that a lot of law departments are in the anger management stage of their law firm relationships. And it's like, they're the last group they care about, so they pay them last. Our data tells us that the law firms are mostly right, that they do get paid a little bit slowly. So what I want to talk to you about is something called supply chain funding, which is something that your business is most likely using for other departments and other vendors, because it makes sense to preserve cash. But most general counsels prefer to keep finance and sourcing at arm's length from the law department because of the unique nature and the sensitivity of legal work. But supply chain funding also hasn't been available to professional services before. I mentioned that I've been here for more than 21 years. We've been doing counseling for about 30 years, so we have a lot of information about the industry, and so we are now offering with a partner a method that would actually set you up to be able to pay the law firms immediately. So our partner pays the law firms as soon as you approve a bill, and then you get 60 days, 90 days, 120 days terms to pay the bill. The law firms agree to a discount for that fast payment. Some people do P cards and that kind of thing. But what we do in this program is the law firms get paid actually literally immediately upon bill approval. You get those extended terms, and then you can actually share in a portion of the fee. I don't mean to shamelessly pitch this as ours only, even though we are the only ones doing it. You might also consider going to your CFO or your head of sourcing and seeing if they have that program, if you're not yet a CounselLink user. And it's something I'm kind of presenting to you guys as a benefit of being kind enough to have me come and present today. Is it's a way that helps. It means you're using other people's money to pay your firms while you're improving your own liquidity. Guess it bears.
Dan, what?
Yep.
Sorry, Dan. What kind of discounts do you see for early payment? What are some of the numbers you see for that?
Seeing from 4 to 10%, depending on how early in the cycle the payment is. If it's paid upon invoice submission or upon approval, and it's actually typically negotiated between the funder, in our case LSQ, and the general counsel as to what discount they want. So we're bringing somebody on board right now that's taking, they're asking for a 5% discount for the immediate payment, and they're taking 60-day terms to pay the bill after approval, and then they're getting back 1% is getting paid back to them on a quarterly payment. So that's a good question. Thank you.
Thanks.
And now these days, again, I don't want to try to talk too much about the current COVID situation, but your law firms will probably tell you that they're fine when you have a conversation with them. But if you're reading the news or above the laws tracking information, law firms are laying people off, they're furloughing people, partners are deferring their bonuses, and this gives them cash right away and helps them out. So it's kind of part of vendor management. And speaking of vendor management, this is when I would turn this over to Haley to talk a little bit about vendor relationships.
Great. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah, I'm excited to speak with you guys about vendor management. Dan, can you pop up our screen for that? He's got the slides there. There we go. So there's a couple of things when we're talking about vendor management that we like to hit on. I find that this is a really exciting area. A lot of people have different approaches they take within vendor management, but there are key themes across the board. Vendor management is so important because it's a relationship, right? Having that trust with our partners, having a trusted relationship with our vendors, it's key. And in order to develop that relationship, we really need to communicate clearly and effectively on a regular basis so that our vendors know what we're expecting of them. And in that way, they can help us to achieve the initiatives that we're looking for in-house. So a couple points we have on here is just picking the most important metrics for your business and being consistent with it. So everybody's always like, what are the magic metrics? Whenever we're at ACC or Kinsero, everybody's talking about the different things that they use when it comes to scoring their law firms. And we do see some overarching themes I'm going to speak about on our vendor profile. But you should add your own flavor to it. Whatever it is in your department that is part of your business organization's overall theme or overall initiatives, communicate those things to your law firm. So Dan, if you'll take us to our next slide here, this is actually going to be our profile that we have within CounselLink. So a lot of people use this as their scorecard, or they can use this to supplement their scorecard. If you don't have an enterprise legal management provider, or if you don't have one that provides any support for rating your vendors, then you'll be doing it manually. That's perfectly okay, but it is a little bit harder to keep up with all the information manually. So just some metrics to consider that we've seen as key themes across this industry are the ones that I have here up by my score. So you can see this score is a nice big present one. It's the composite score for this firm of 78. To the right of that, you'll see 4 key metrics that are making up that composite score. So when I say remain consistent, find the things that consistently you want to drive home with your firms. And what we see is most people want efficiency. And what that has to do with is, the timing, how quickly they're submitting their invoices. Also compliance, how in compliance they are with your outside counsel guidelines. If you do not have outside counsel guidelines in place, that's definitely something that I would work on getting together so your firms know what they're agreeing to when they are going to be representing you. And then pricing structure, are they just doing detailed hourly? Do they offer you flat fees? Is there a diversity in the pricing structure that they handle across matters? And then internal review, which I think is really key. The nice thing about the way we do it, and I would recommend that you do the same, is that we weight these to come up with a composite score. I would recommend that you have some type of weighing system, but that you remain flexible with it. And the reason why I say flexible is because the pandemic is a perfect example for that. Efficiency is maybe not something that we want to rate our law firms on too seriously right now. Maybe we want to extend them some grace and not rate them too harshly if it takes them longer to get their invoices to us, because that could also benefit us, right? We don't want to pay things right now too quickly if we don't have to. So maybe don't weigh that so highly. I always recommend weighing compliance a little bit higher, because if you've gone through the trouble to put together your billing guidelines, your law firms should be they should be extending the respect of submitting invoices that are in compliance. That being said, Law 360, I think it's been a couple months back now in February, they did an article where they interviewed firms to see how often they're submitting things that are in compliance with guidelines of their clients. And they're often not doing it. They're relying on you to catch those things through an enterprise legal management system like CounselLink, or to do the manual review. So if you don't have an ELM in place, I recommend that you still keep compliance up there pretty high, because they're taking up more of your time if they're submitting things that are not in compliance by requiring you to do some serious manual review of their invoices. And then I think internal review is always one that should be very valuable and highly weighted across, because it really provides for your internal personalities too. I mean, a law firm needs to be the right fit for you as a company. They also need to be the right fit for your department too. They need to help you achieve the metrics that you're looking for that make the law firm really shine as a business partner for the entire unit. So internal review, I think, is key. And the way we handle it in CounselLink is a rating system, just like you are going to rate a product on Amazon. You have your 1 to 5 stars. It's very simple. You have a commentary box. I would encourage your lawyers to rate often and frequently. Don't wait until the end of a matter has come to close, because matters can last for years. And that's not going to be a good display of how that firm performed for you over time. A few other things, we've got in-app analytics that are at your fingertips. If you have a system that provides that, great. If you can build those for yourself, and if you're a guru in Excel, that's awesome. But I think that knowing in-app, or knowing immediate information behind financials is important for when you're working with your vendors. And we see people doing panel reviews and vendor reviews anywhere from quarterly to annually. So being able to show, this is how much we spent with you over the past 12 months. These are the matters you handled with us. And that third one that you see is the timekeeper level billing, how their timekeeper rates stack up against the other firms you work for. So that's an internal benchmarking stat that you want to keep a little tag on, because you want to see, are those firms, are they competitive with your other firms? the last thing I want to point out before we move on to our next screen is our diversity survey. This is most people, most departments have some initiative around this for their law firms, whether they're collecting that data or they're just having an informal discussion about it. We do our survey to mirror the ABA's, but I highly recommend that if that is important to you, you communicate that. A lot of our law firms, our legal departments will say they feel like that change starts with them. It's their initiative to drive that home into the law firm market. So if it's important to you, communicate it just like any of your other metrics. So Dan, if you'll take us to the next slide, I wanted to just talk frequently for a moment about the importance of internal benchmarking, and then Dan is going to talk to you about external benchmarking. So this is a great slide here. This is also, there's some blocked out information. If you guys see the gray bars, that is because these are actual law firms that we took this from a client. But our clients, they're looking at how many law firms they have and how they compare. This one has the law firms that make up 80% of their spend and how much they've spent within each of those firms over a 3-year period. If you have a ton of firms, it's good to scale back. It's good to have less people. I think that if you don't want to scale back entirely, you still want to work with 50 over time. Have your favorites that make up the most of your spend that you regularly have metrics around to look at. And that's exactly what this client did here with their departmental trends. They can see how much they spent year over year, and then they can dive within those individual charts to see why did they spend less year over year. You know, maybe that Royal Blue firm in 2018 that got a ton of work and got a ton of spend, maybe they didn't do as well as far as the relationship. Maybe their internal reviews weren't doing, you know, they weren't as responsive as we needed. They weren't in compliance with our billing guidelines. So it helps you make those decisions year over year. But internal benchmarking is key, as well as benchmarking your law firms against the rest of the market. So Dan, I'll pass it back to you so you can talk about the insight.
Thank you, Haley. So to get insight, you might need to access benchmark data. There are several sources for benchmark data, and I'll do a shameless plug and say that we do include it in CounselLink. We've got a database of $33 billion in legal spend details, so it's a pretty good place to get that benchmark. But here's the easy way to show it. I kind of wrote it on the slide, but this is a presentation. If you wanted to tell the board or somebody else, the CEO, show them that you're demonstrating some changes in it, you might take a look at your matter cost and compare it to the benchmark. Now, rather than compare grapefruits to grapes, you really want to compare it by region, by practice area, and by firm size. So in this case, you're going to be able to go to the CEO or go to the board and say, compared to other people in our industry, we are $2,000 less per matter. And, you know, pick a matter. This could be employment, it could be regulatory, it could be corporate transactional. It's done by matter type, by region, and by the size firm. So among other clients using mid-size firms of 100 attorneys in the Des Moines area, this is how we stack up against them for these kinds of cases. So it really makes for indisputable data about meaningful results. But you can take that same kind of information and use it differently if your audience is one of your key law firms. So now let's say that you're having a meeting with one of your 80% law firms, and you're meeting with a relationship partner. Then this might be the graph you show them. You look at them and you say, look, your partner rate is 15% higher. Now again, by matter type and by region and by firm size. So again, it's apples to apples, not grapes to grapefruits. My question to the audience is, what kinds of conversations could you have if you had this data available to you for those meetings?
We definitely could tell your outside firms that their rates are sort of out of whack with their competitors, and that, you know, request that they be more in line.
Yep. Yeah. So if hourly rate is important, and you know, I'll reveal a secret about Dan Ruderman. I think hourly rate is probably one of the least important metrics of all, and yet it's still the most commonly used one. So if you don't want to fight the tide just yet, but you want a metric that you can use for both your law firm conversation and your internal conversations, it's good and easy to get. And once you get it, you can start to focus on things that I, again, personally or professionally believe are more valuable. But I think you're right, Chris. You go to your firm and say, I want to keep using you guys. You get, a fair amount of my business. I can't go to my board and show that you're this much higher for this comparable kind of work. There'll be exceptions on the big cases. That's fine. But in general, I can't go and show this 15% uplift unless you do something else for me, and you can negotiate.
So Dan and Haley, just to note, we have 10 minutes left. So I just want
we're
just
done.
okay.
We're going to hit our last slide in a minute, Chris.
Good.
But again, and then to my earlier comment also, it's having anything that helps you have a conversation is a good thing to have. So that's what this is about. Key takeaways. See, Chris, I was right there for you.
Excellent. Thank you. You're very timely.
So, I tried to, we did pare our presentation down. I could probably talk forever. My family tells me that's the case, and some of my colleagues, and my boss always tells me that. So, but what we wanted to do is just show you some key points, because that's kind of the argument we're making, is pick some key things and focus on them. Do short-term, mid-range, and long-term projects. Pick some key metrics, and then just keep managing to them. And it's going to let you move along what they call the maturity curve. And that's it. So on the macro level, is pick those metrics that matter to you, to your leadership, to your stakeholders. Demonstrate that you've got deep financial control. Treat your law firms like the trusted partners they are, but also apply some of the common sense things that other vendors abide by. Clear commercial guidelines, and the fact that you're going to monitor those, right? People, what is that expression? People respect what you inspect. So that's the purpose of doing it. It's not to berate them or micromanage them. Communicate your goals to your vendors, and then always celebrate your progress and your success. Celebrate it everywhere you can, that you're making progress towards your goals. And my last slide just says thank you and gives you our email addresses if anybody wants to. And then Chris, I don't know your usual schedule, but obviously we'll stay on and answer questions. We can go back to slides or other data.
Yeah, so we still have about 5 minutes left for questions. So why don't we stop the share and then sort of open it up to questions. What Charlie did ask in the chat window, I didn't see any metrics around employee performance, especially in relation to the relative value versus matters graph. Is this an important contrast, and are there performance metrics that may be added? So I'll just say, I know from our prep session that Dan was really only skimming the surface in terms of, and giving examples of the types of metrics that he'd recommend that legal departments track. So this wasn't meant at all to be exhaustive, I think is accurate to say, just exemplary. So, but anyway, Dan, I'll let you answer the question.
And the question is in the work that we've seen, are we seeing people track management satisfaction with employee?
Yeah, more metrics around employee performance. Sort of, how are the employees within the legal department doing at their job? So, and Charlie,
if I to that.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, we do see our GCs looking at the level and the amount of matters that are being handled across their internal lawyers. So I do think that's important to track, just so you kind of know the workload. And some of that was displayed in the graph we looked at. Now, as far as quality goes, another area, we didn't talk too much about it, but Dan had a graph. He did speak about it in the beginning. The ability to track your internal request is really important to show how many different business partners are coming to you and who's getting assigned to give that advice or to review those contracts within your business. So that's another area that we look at often, and we see GCs wanting to have metrics around. I think it does lend to quality as well, because you can see, if that's a bigger area matter, or if that's a bigger issue within the firm, if it's a frontline issue for the business, and you've got one attorney that's been working on that for X amount of days, and that's, probably going to be a metric you want to know about.
great. Any other questions that people want to ask out loud or via chat? Mostly people have been asking via the chat, which is fine, but maybe I can also unmute. So maybe I'll unmute all briefly, and I may remute if there's a lot of background noise, but I'm going to unmute all. I'm going to take a chance here and see if anyone wants to chime in
Dan,
with a.
actually, I had a question because you actually mentioned that the rate, the rate per hour that most people talk about it, but that's not the only thing to look at because
Right.
just given I'm not a lawyer, so I think people always seem to talk about that and how it's going up. We'd love to hear what are the other metrics that people should be looking at.
You're just setting me up for a long conversation, but I'll give you the short version. So I think,
Yeah.
so first of all, you start with partner rates and associate rates, your hourly rate.
Yeah.
So one of our clients said that they went to a law firm and they said, I need you to reduce the hourly rate. And the answer was, over drinks, I'll give you a $25 an hour rate as long as you never look at my hours. Right? So obviously that means you have to look at the rate, you have to look at the hours, then you have to look at the staffing. So we do recommend a metric, which is a roll-up of those things called the matter hourly rate, which is by type of matter, what's my actual hourly rate based on the way that firm staffed it. Then I can do a nice apples to apples comparison between 2, 3, or many firms of when it's this kind of a matter in this region, how are you guys, what's your matter hourly rate? You then would want to look at the matter hours, I guess, and then you could look at the duration of the matter, and you'd look at the outcome from the matter. So we have one client, and it's clearly they have a lot of very similar matters of relatively low value, very common for their business. And they look at 3 metrics. They look at what the total cost of the matter is, the duration of the matter is, and the outcome. They use those 3 metrics to compare all their firms. And that takes them away from a lot of the micromanagement aspects of it, and it's a much more trusting relationship. So so the answer is still, it depends, Nita, but there's examples of other metrics that are far more important. Yeah.
Yeah, Nate, one thing I wanted to add to that point that I've seen in my own practice is it's very dependent on the individual legal department. For example, I did a project for a Fortune 500 legal department where they really wanted to look at the staffing of matters, junior associates, senior associates, junior partners, senior partners. That particular company really liked having youngish, hungry junior partners do large percentages of the work because they thought they were the most motivated and the most likely to be very efficient, but not yet that costly. So they actually tracked very carefully. And when they saw these lawyers with 35, 40 years of experience, sometimes doing like 50% of the work, they did a little talking to the client, to the firm, to say, you can have these senior people at $1,000 and up being 50% of the billings of the cases. We don't think that's not the way we like to staff cases. So that was a very specific to that legal department, but I thought that was an interesting anecdote from my own experience.
Thanks, Chris. And that is why I say you pick the metrics that matter to you. And when I say to you, I mean you, the general counsel, but also your boss, whether you count that as the CEO or the board, or your stakeholders, if you're a mutual company, or shareholders. So whoever that is, which metrics matter to them? And there is no question that there's times as a general counsel that if you don't walk into the board meeting or the CEO's office and say, we're handling this matter with Case and White, I've got a $1,500 an hour partner on it, that's not the right thing to do in certain cases, right? But in the other stuff, most of the stuff that you're doing most of the time, that's the last person that you want to have on that matter. Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. And we need to wrap up, but I wanted to thank Dan and Haley for their time. And thank you, Nita and David, as always, for a great session. And maybe one takeaway that I have from this discussion that I'd love to share is that I think all these points you made are great. And also, in addition, now is really the time when I think general counsel and other in-house counsel really should be thinking about the value they bring to the table. I think for obvious reasons, given the market downturn, this is really a time to kind of step up and try to show that you are not just a lawyer, you're also a business person. You have an eye on the numbers, you're aware of these issues. Because if you don't proactively deal with these types of expense issues, cost issues, all the issues that Dan and Haley talked about, they will be, you'll have it forced upon you potentially in the near future. So I would advise really everyone out there in the in-house community to take a close look at how they track this kind of information and maybe step up and try to be proactive in how you present either the C-suite or whoever is up your management chain to make sure that they see that you are on top of these things and you are taking action. So I think that would be, think about the times we're in and think about taking these types of metrics very seriously. Not that you don't normally, but it's perhaps even more important in the current circumstances.
Well,
but
that was really well said, Chris. Thank you.
of course, yeah, happy to chime in when I can. But this was great information. Thank you so much. We're here every Friday at noon Eastern time on GC Casual Friday. We often have guest speakers like we had today. Sometimes we have more of a around the table networking session with general counsel and other in-house lawyers. So I wanted to just thank everybody for your participation. And lastly, have a wonderful Memorial Day weekend. If you want to get in touch with anyone on the call, you could reach out to me at chris@inthehouse.org. Happy to connect you with the speakers or others on the call. But thanks again, and we'll hope to see you next week.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.